I'm just going to do a quick roll call, and if you can just do a thumbs up or hands up, that would be great. So Felix Lechner, okay, Jeff Downey, Catherine Lang, Liz Fisher, Nell Del Rosario, Sharon Coco, and Therese Kane. Wonderful. And I am Kelly McMahon, and Anita is the big A that's on the screen. And our guests are Marcus Battle and Karina San Diego. Okay. The next list on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from last meeting. So this is just our first stab, and if there's another format that you all would like, please let me know. But I chose just to do a narrative with highlighted bullets of the things and questions that we raised. But if there's another format or method that you guys would like for us to document this, please let me know. And I'll give you guys a few minutes just to review, and then we'll take a look at it and approve the minutes or make any changes as noted.
I thought you did a great job for somebody who was driving to get all those details. So.
No, I have to give my hat tip the hat to Anita, because she
Right.
was the mastermind who was able to transcribe and make use of my notes as well as listen intently. So.
Sorry, Liz, I saw your hand was raised, but you're muted.
Oh,
so if you unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, very well. So I was wanting to make a correction on one of the discussion points or questions that I had in section 4. I was asking if there was any bearing with our district's standing with the Office of Public Construction. That probably should be capitalized, Office of Public Construction, and how the SFNA is put together. The SFNA is the School Facilities Needs Analysis. Surplus property oftentimes is taken into account for that document.
So is this for question 1? Do you want us to include the statement?
That Liz Fisher asked if there was any bearing to having surplus property with our district standing with the Office of Public Construction and how our SFNA is put together. So I'm not sure if that's too wordy.
No, we're just going to go ahead and document it as you're saying it. So I'll make these corrections.
So it's, yeah, the district standing with the OPC.
OPSC, yeah.
How our SFNA is put together.
How school facilities needs analysis for FSD. Okay, let me reread this sentence for you. On question 1, Liz Fisher asks, is there any bearing on the district's surplus property with regard to OPSC and OPSC, Office of Public School Construction, and how is our school facilities needs analysis put together in conjunction with this information?
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay. Are there any additional edits that you all have noted? Okay, so with the changes that we've just documented for question 1, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as they have been prepared and submitted with the changes identified?
I will make a motion.
Can someone second it?
I'll second.
Okay, so the meeting minutes are approved with the changes noted. we're going to review. I provided you all with copies of the 2 different ed code requirements that we referenced in our last conversation. And they are California Ed Code 17445 and California Ed Code 17387. So California Ed Code 17445 allows for the governing board of any school district to sell any real property belonging to the school district or may lease for a term not exceeding 99 years of any real property together with personal property located or belonging to the school district, which is not or will not be needed by the district for school classroom buildings at the time of delivery and title and possession. Or lease may be made without may be made without taking a vote of the electors of the district and shall be made in the manner provided by this article. Then the second one is a references the state legislature in that particular one, 17387. It is the intent of the legislature that leases entered into pursuant to this chapter provided for the community involvement by attendance area at the district level. This community involvement should facilitate making the best possible judgments about the use of excess school facilities in each individual situation. It is the intent of the legislature to have the community involved before decisions are made about school closure or the use of surplus space, thus avoiding community conflict and assuring building use that is compatible with the community needs and desires. So with these 2 particular ed codes, as we had discussed before, I believe that is the basis by which this committee was formed, and that our task is to basically execute what these wishes are based on this legislation. Yes, Liz.
So last meeting, Sharon brought up the concern that there might be restrictions to whom we're able to offer the property to for sale.
Mm-hmm.
And looking in that same statute, 17457.5, section F, small f, it says this section shall apply only to real property identified as surplus after July 1st, 2012. A school district selling or leasing surplus property is not required to offer that property to a charter school on or after July 1st, 2016.
Oh, okay. Okay. Karina, do you have any comments or clarifications on that?
So that's the charter school priority that was in place a few years ago, but it sunsetted 2 years ago, and they have been trying to revive it at the legislative level, and they haven't been able to. And you may recall back then, the charter schools were trying to find facilities, and it was difficult for them to get into school facilities under the Proposition 39 process. So that's why there was that kind of priority in the surplus property statutes that has sunsetted. So the priority offerings to charter schools now gone, but all the other offerings are still in place for our purposes.
Okay. Yes, Jeff.
So I just want to get one clarification, and if it's an absolute no, then I know I'm not going to bring it up again. But I'm still concerned about if this property is not usable by FUSD anymore, because I don't feel like the answer we got last time solidified. The pipeline just doesn't seem to add up as the reason for it not being used. And I just want to make sure it has no viability, because one of the things I thought about, if we were to be able to use that site again, as it was originally going forward with the dual immersion program, we would be able to get rid of the portables at the 3 schools that we'd be pulling from. And those portables cost us just over $10,000 a year. And I know that's a concern from the teacher standpoint of having to continually work in portables that seem to be ongoing forever, and to be in an actual building that was designed for teaching, not necessarily a portable. So I guess just my thought is this a salvageable property that we can still use for educational purposes, or are we saying that that door is closed, there's no way we're going to be able to use it, and then we have to move forward with trying to sell it?
I'm going to defer that to our associate superintendent to answer.
Yeah, and and I might need a little help from Karina, but my understanding, Jeff, and this is before I came into the district, that there was discussion about making that property available for the for one of the purposes that you just mentioned.
Right.
And-
It was for the dual immersion program. They had they had everything. They were ready to go. And
Right,
so it
right.
got pulled at last minute. And I understand the rationale that was given, but based on the location and where that pipeline runs by other properties that FUSD owns, I just want to make sure that I'm settled on it before we're pursuing the next path.
Well, and like I said, I'll let Karina get into the technical aspects of that, but my understanding is the board did make a determination that the site was not usable for district purposes based on some of the reasons that you noted and that I think you all discussed last time, primarily the pipeline that was running in very close proximity to the property. And I did read some of your discussion from that. So, and I think the reasons there were based on risk assessment and so forth. So the board did make that determination, and as a result of that, they deemed this property to move forward to be considered for surplus. So we are, as staff and administration, we're acting on the board's wishes in that regard and determination. Karina, is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, you're right, Marcus. So, the issue we had with the former Marshall site was the whole Title V site selection process was not at issue when the school initially was a school for the district. So when we leased it to the private school, we terminated that lease. When we had to revive our CDS code to operate or operate the school once again, we had to go through CDE and kind of check off the site evaluation criteria. And in that case, because of the high pressure pipeline, we did a risk assessment, and Marcus is right in that CDE would not have identified the school as not being able to operate as a school, but the board made that determination that they were not comfortable with proceeding it, operating as a school once they knew what the risk was. Because when the school was initially operating, we never had to do the pipeline risk assessment. But now with that information, that is what, it's public record. That's what places the district at a liability and risk. And so, and I think I just want to remind this group that the purpose of this committee is not to, I guess, identify which sites will be up for sale, but the purpose is for this team to look at the inventory district-wide of space, vacant space, facilities, fields, usage, and I think we can rely on the evaluation that's been done by the Facilities Advisory Committee to help you with that. But in furtherance of that, I think it is to recommend in a report to the board certain sites which this team has determined to be true surplus to the district's mission and programs, and that your recommendation could be for disposal, whether it's for lease or sale. So I just want to make sure that we're not immediately going straight to let's sell Marshall site, but we need to kind of evaluate everything first and then put all of that in a recommendation for the board.
Liz and then Felix.
Sorry. I just wanted to add that, years ago when some of these schools were built, for instance, Parkmont, built right next to the BART line, that would not happen in today's planning because the California Department of Education, or maybe it's the Office of Public School Construction, would not allow for a school site to be so close to train tracks. And so I think over the years, the standard for a school site has changed and become more stringent. So if that's of any benefit to everyone in their consideration.
Yes. Felix.
I just wanted to say for the record, just like Jeff, I think we're kindred spirits there. I also feel that the site is ideally positioned to be a school site. The accessibility isn't really that great for any other uses. I'm fine with helping the board sell the property. As you all know, I'm a real estate broker, so transactions are great. I just think that it's right in the middle of that neighborhood. It's got a couple roads in and out. And I just wanted to mention one time that if anybody wanted to embrace another risk assessment, you'd have my blessing. But I'm happy to pursue and help you sell this property.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions or comments on the ed codes that we have reviewed? Because Karina has put together a really powerful and very informative slide presentation that I'd like to go ahead and share with you all. And we can actually review, and the presentation will actually answer quite a few of our questions. And after we do that, Associate Superintendent has provided us also with an article on one-time use of surplus property proceeds. And I think that's also very beneficial and useful for us to review, because that will also provide the framework around how, if we do choose to go ahead and pursue Marshall site for surplus, how it will impact and really aid the district in addressing some of the current needs that we have. So with that, let me go ahead and get this presentation for you guys. Present now. Let's see. Of course, I don't have the document that I want up. One day I'll get this that I could just do click, click, and it be as it should. Let's see. Escape. Alrighty. Present now. Window. There we go. Share. Can everybody see the screen? Because I can't see you all, but just let me know that you all are able to see.
We can see the screen, but for me, the presentation, it's only half of a presentation. I don't know if that's what everybody else is seeing.
Yeah, same here.
Let's see. Let's do, how about now?
Yeah,
Is that better?
that's better.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, let me move this little box out of the way. Oh, it won't let me move it. All right, so this is, Karina, I'm gonna let you go ahead and take over your presentation. So this
Okay.
is disposition of surplus property.
So we quickly created this just to answer some of your questions that came up at the last meeting, and I will go through them quickly because a lot of the information is not only in the slide but in the statutes, and once we get to that point in the process, we can definitely dive into it in further detail. So this is the overview. I think your questions hit on the surplus property disposition process. How do we prepare the property for sale? How much do we sell it for, and board authority related to this process, as well as history of the Marshall site. And I only say Marshall site, although there are several other, and I think we went through this anyways earlier, but we should be talking about history of some of the other sites which are currently not being used, but when we get to that slide, we'll get into that. So next slide, please, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a quick overview. When there is property that is identified as being no longer needed for the district's programs or mission, the statutes do require the formation of this committee. So the committee is involved in the disposition of any real property owned by the district. Is public property. The board will be considering this committee's recommendations on usage, whether it's disposal, leasing, or other programs to be cited there. when we are in the disposition process, there are certain required public offerings that are to be made. And we talked about the charter school public offering, which used to be in place but no longer in effect. But there are other offerings that must be made to other agencies and entities and companies. And then, of course, the final public bidding is an auction, and it must be sold to the highest bidder. Next slide, Kelly.
Oops, did I go too far? Okay.
No, yeah, that's fine. So once any property is identified as surplus, we do have to have an appraisal, get everything in place, and then the board must adopt a resolution letting the public know that there is a property that has been deemed surplus by the 7-Eleven committee and determined to be surplus by the board, and that it has an intent to proceed with selling it. So that is a big first step, and it takes a while to get there sometimes, but that triggers everything else that follows. All right, Kelly.
Okay.
One of the first things is, of course, we are always in coordination with the local planning commissions, whether it's developer fees, whether it's building new schools and such. We're always having to deal with the planning commission, and this is one of those times as well. So one of the first things is to notify them, and a lot of times they do have a use, they have an interest. I think the city of Fremont, especially in the past, the Marshall site is a good example. When we notified them that it was going to be determined to be surplus, they acquired it from us under the Naylor Act, which is statutes kind of setting forth certain ways that a city can acquire open space and park. Counties, local planning commissions, they're very helpful up front in kind of guiding the process or just taking the property off our hands. Next slide, Kelly. Some of the priority offerings, although the charter school is out, we do still have to provide notices, not only to the cities and county planning commissions, but also to the local special education programs to see if they would like to lease any of the vacant classrooms or space that this crew has identified as being surplus. Optional, of course, is also the child care development agencies. And I think this is something that this conversation has been ongoing with respect to having more child care opportunities in the district. So that is an optional offering that can be put in place for this process as well. And then, of course, there are the priority offerings to the parks and recreation agencies. And when I say offerings, it's a lot of, it's a letter. And we will have a form letter, and you work with the staff to identify all the local park districts and recreation agencies, as well as all the local SELPAs. So it's a quick process, and a lot of times the letters are not seen by the agencies, but it is a requirement by statute, so we will go through that process. Next slide, please, Kelly. Once all the priority offerings are made, and that process typically takes almost 2 months, because you have to wait for the first round, see if there's any response, and then negotiation. And then once that period is done, then you send out your next priority offerings, because there are different levels of priority agencies in the statutes. Once you go through the entire priority offerings process, and most of the time, I will say, no entities respond. So therefore, that is when the district prepares to put it up for auction and prepares all the board documents to proceed with the surplus sale disposition process. Next slide, please, Kelly. So this is just a list of the statutory requirements. We talked about the resolution of intent to sell. That's the first action item by the board. Bid documents. It's a lot of upfront work to prepare the bid documents for the potential bidders, having them come look at the site, working with them, having them do their due diligence. There is also, of course, a requirement to notify the property owner, the previous property owner. In that case, I'm not sure who it is for the Marshall site, but for example, for the horse property, it would have to be Caltrans and the Alameda County Transportation District. Once the bid documents are set up, then the board will go through the whole process of identifying the parameters for the sale and at what price the board will be willing the property, as well as setting a public hearing. And that public hearing is essentially the auction date. And once the auction date comes, it's at a regularly scheduled board meeting. And then that is when the auction will take place. A lot of times, and there's a whole process for the auction process that we can, go through when we get to that point. But most of the time, again, we could go through the entire sale process and there will be no responses. And so a lot of this is to essentially show the state that we did go through the process. And even once we identified that there are no takers in effect, then there are other options at the end. But this is what must happen first.
Okay.
When we're at the auction stage, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew we do have to accept the highest price. A lot of times in the past, for example, let's say a school district did not want a certain private school to put in the highest bid. So unfortunately, you have to go with that bid. The other option would be that the board rejects all bids. So you cannot go with the second highest just because you didn't like who the offerer was.
Okay.
Thank you, Kelly.
So I
Next
guess,
slide.
Melina, so even if they didn't like who the offer was, would they just reject everything and go back out all over again?
Correct. I mean, there are options to go through a waiver process with CDE. So you can directly negotiate, with a second or third highest bidder. But the statute, and we have to all remember, right, this is public property. So we want to be able to get the most money for the property. And that's why the statute is set up this way.
Okay.
The question was asked about preparing the property for sale. So for the districts, you do not have to do anything special to prepare the property for sale. I think it is prudent to allow the bidders to have a site visit, sit down with the facilities folks to get a better understanding of what is on the site. So it is more a process or having a window for the district to sit down with the potential bidders so that they have all the information they need in order to move forward with the sale. Because, for them, it's kind of a one shot, right? That they look at the property, they do their due diligence, and they submit their price. And you enter into a purchase and sale agreement. A lot of times when we want to purchase, we do insert an additional due diligence period to do additional evaluation. But, as the seller, we would make sure that we shorten that time period. So as soon as we enter into a sales agreement, we're quickly proceeding to closing. So on our end, nothing special to be done to prepare the site, but maybe to help the potential bidders. Okay, so
I think,
what?
Liz is continuing to raise her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Okay.
cannot.
I couldn't see her.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry, if you want to take questions at the end, that's fine too. I'm just, when you pause, I'm not sure if you're,
I'm sorry, I can't.
would you like to take my question now?
Of course.
Okay. We just reviewed, I think it's section 17464 of offering the space to priority bidders, I guess you could call it, or for interest, if it were. Do we also have, from what I understand in that section 3 of that, that we may also have to approach the regents of CSU, possible public housing or public anything, and some nonprofit corporations as well, perhaps?
That's true. So a lot, again, these letters and it's a list of all these agencies that are identified in the statute. And then the nonprofit, though, that's a separate section where you can just post or publish the notice in the newspaper, and
Right.
that's kind of a general. But you're right, every single one has to be notified, but because it goes in big chunks, it goes by pretty quickly. So, the first 30 days and the next chunk goes out. But you're right, it does have to happen, but it'll go by fast.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay, so the question on what does depend on the type of offering, we'll talk about. So the Naylor Act, that was the statute that allows the cities or the local park and recreation agencies to purchase it at a good price from the district. And that is how the Marshall site, a portion of the Marshall site, was sold to the city, as well as the former Williamson school site that was sold to the city under the Naylor, sold to this agency. So it is at a lower price because it's going to be sold to another public agency. The next slide should talk about below market and market rate offerings. So other below market offerings will be to some of the other public agencies that Liz just mentioned. But then the market rate offerings will be to, as noted here, these, and then by notice. So the public authority, all these other nonprofit charitable institutions, those are in the grouping, the category of not getting a discount per se from the district when they purchase surplus site from us.
Okay.
Is the best way to get the highest price for the property is just difficult because you don't have control over the process or control over who ends up purchasing the site from us. And then history, we talked about the history of the Marshall site and why it was determined to be submitted to this committee for consideration. And Kelly, I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk about the horse property, which is over on, I think we call it Dakota, over on 356, whatever, Fremont
I'm
Boulevard.
terrible with the addresses.
Okay,
It's
35668.
Yeah,
What is
Fremont
it?
Boulevard, close to Fremont, Dakota.
Correct. So that was a site that we purchased from Caltrans and the Alameda County Transportation. Teresa will remember, but it's 3 parcels. It's a huge piece of property. Right now we have a tenant on there kind of taking care of the main portion of the site. And the only reason why we are bringing this forward to the committee is because starting next year, the district will be assessed a penalty for not using the site. So, when school districts or public agency, when we land bank, when we purchase sites at a discount and we just hold on to it and not use it for the purpose for which it was purchased, the Department of General Services will penalize us. And it is a low fee, but that it's still a penalty. And that one starts next year. And so to the extent that we can identify some tangent usage or a true, usage or some sort of shared joint cooperation program out there, we will be assessed a penalty. Of course, another option for you folks is to sell it. I think another option is joint occupancy. And Marcus will be talking about some of the flexibility, under these COVID-19 legislation, one of them being the usage of surplus sale proceeds. Previously, you couldn't use it towards, the general fund for, and it had to be towards other capital facilities usage. But a joint occupancy is another type of relationship where the school district can seek proposals from private entities or public entities for the site at their cost, and the school district will be able to use a portion of that developed site at no cost. And previously, pre-COVID legislation, we had to receive approval from the State Board of Education, but that requirement is now gone. So it kind of makes it easier for us to go through the process and maybe do some sort of joint program and joint development out there at whatever site that you identify to be surplus. So that was the horse property, and I think the Patterson Ranch property, that one is the one over by Paseo Padre and Arden. We did go through a process of potentially exchanging some of the sites with our neighbors, the city and the park east. What is it called?
East Bay Regional Park.
Bay Regional Park District. But that site is also sitting vacant, and so that is another one. In 2 years we will be assessed a penalty. So that's something for this committee to consider, usage, disposal, or some sort of joint occupancy or joint development out there, if not for school development.
And on that property as well, is the fine hefty, or is it a minimal fine that will incur over time?
So the interesting thing is DGS, they assess the fine based on the value of the property. And so we did get, quote unquote, a deal for the horse property. And then the Patterson Ranch, it was, if you recall, it was donated to us.
Mhm.
So although to us it was free, I think the value of the property was a certain amount based on the tax documents that the seller provided us. And I think DGS is assessing it on a different valuation. So I'm not sure where they came up with that.
Okay. Okay. All right. And that is the end of her presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we should be able to see everyone again. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Karina. That was very helpful and very informative. Do you guys have any additional questions on the information that she shared? So Felix, then Liz, then Kathy, and then Noli. And then Sharon, did you raise your hand as well? Oh, okay. Or was that Jeff? All right. So first up is Felix, then Liz, then Kathy, then Noli.
Ms. Samaniego, thank you so much for the presentation. I've got a couple of quick questions. The first thing is that this particular site, I think, is different from some of the other sites you've mentioned in that it already has buildings on it, right? So
Correct.
you could, in order to avoid a penalty, for example, if you could, I don't know if it would be permissible to temporarily house, some maintenance staff or whatever there, it would be easier to claim that the property is being used as it would be for a completely vacant land where you have to erect structures where you can't claim that it's being used. Is that at all the possibility to delay the penalty if our process takes longer than expected? That's the first question. I have one more.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead?
I can answer that. So the Marshall site, it won't be assessed a penalty for a couple more years, but you're right. It is, I think that was things we had discussed in the past was, for storage purposes or, all the extra student chairs and furniture that we could store there. But, just so you know, for the Dakota site, the horse property, even though it's vacant, there is a way for administrative usage. For example, using it as a bus yard. I know we have an electric bus fleet, maybe having some, usage of the site for parking lot purposes. So there are options. So I just want you to be, kind of open-minded to those kind of opportunities.
And then if I may, Kelly, if I may, I have a second question, which is that, this is obviously a long process, and maybe the likelihood is that it would go to a public entity. But I just wanted to ask that if we ever get to the point where the property is offered to the public at auction, is there any chance that we could potentially entitle the property? I'm sure you know that most of the value in any of these propositions is to have an entitled property. If you have an unused surplus property on top of a gas line with old buildings and no plan, that isn't worth very much, okay? And what's going to happen is somebody is going to build a bunch of houses on it, and that neither the banks nor the people that occupy will care about the pipeline, and the person that buys it from you will make a lot of money. So and I'm sorry I'm saying this so bluntly, but I'm trying to advise the district on how to get the most money. So the best thing, if I may, again, I'm playing devil's advocate, would be to lean on the city as our friendly agency to somehow permit and then hope we get neighborhood approval for a 20-story apartment tower that overlooks the freeway with a nice bay view, and then we would sell that project, which would get a lot more money than, again, a vacant site on top of a gas pipeline. Is there any chance that we could somehow engage in any kind of entitlement or planning process to present a vision to a potential buyer?
So you can do that. We have done that either upfront, as you say, and then put it up for auction, or you can, during the auction process, have the execution or the closing, I guess, the closing of the sale contingent on that specific developer to be able to entitle it for whatever purpose they need within 6 months or a year, or however we think is as soon as possible. So there are two ways to do it, but you're absolutely right. That is, if that's what but we have to remember too, the Marshall site, there is a community park. The city owns that park next door. So I think we said something great, which is leaning to the city and say, hey, we're getting rid of this, and maybe working with them on that piece there.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Liz?
Okay, I guess there is some consideration, as you mentioned too, how we came to acquire Marshall, or how it became part of our district. And of course, it's a very old site. It's been there for a while. But pertaining to Article 4, 17463.7, was it purchased with non-state funds, that is bond or developer money? Because if so, then there's ramifications, I guess. And so that was one question. And you said that we wouldn't be assessed a penalty. I guess it would be for another couple of years. I guess it would be good to know what that penalty is going to cost, because if it's nominal, it may be okay to consider leaving the land fallow, as it were. But I think that that's important information to assess.
Sure. So I'm sorry, what was the code section you just referenced?
17463.7.
Okay. So I'll look that up. So Kelly, to answer her Liz's second question, I think this last round of the unused site certification, and maybe we can work together to gather that information and have the answer for this group at the next meeting.
That's fine.
And
I'll start looking for it as well.
okay. And then with respect, so, and I actually do not know how the Marshall site was purchased as well.
Yes, that was the other question, is was the site purchased with non-state funds or state funds?
And we can research that if we know about what year we took ownership of that property.
Well, we can do some research on that and find out. So the next person was Noli.
Thank you, Kelly. Is there any FUSD student, teachers, or staff that may be displaced if this site is liquidated?
No.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's one.
So your question was surrounding, are there students on that site now?
Yeah, I just answered the question, Kelly.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. And then Kathy.
It's just a very quick question, and it may not be moot, or it may be moot. What happens if there's no bids? Do you move to a donate phase? I mean, or is it just said, you just say, well, let's just wait a while? Just a question, because you gave a really, the slideshow was really great, and that kind of left that one thing open. Thank you.
So that's right. A lot of times there are no bidders, or the board ends up rejecting the bids because the price is not high enough, or they don't like the person, with or the entity with the high. So what happens from there is it's a matter of, yes, holding on to it or finding some other option to lease it, or we can seek a waiver from the entire surplus property restrictions and process from the CDE, and to negotiate directly with whomever we wish. And that happens a lot. The waiver process can happen quickly, and the way the statutory language is set up is that the CDE must approve a request for a waiver unless they find that something is, critically missing. And that's only happened to me once, but all the other times it has gone through. So it is an opportunity for the board to identify, a few entities that it may want to sell to or lease to.
Yeah, and one scenario comes to mind. If it reaches the bidding process and a private school wants to be there, and the school district would just as soon not see a private school come into the district that could potentially take away students, from our enrollment, that may not be the best win-win situation. So,
Therese, did you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I just wondered, kind of picking up on that last comment, what difference will it make a difference who we identify, if it's going to be somebody interested in housing or somebody interested in putting a private school there, or something totally different?
So there's the two avenues, right? We can either seek a waiver before we even go through the entire surplus property disposition process. And at that point, it would be good to identify that kind of warm and fuzzy entity and let the CDE know why we are going down this route. But if we go through the entire surplus disposition process and then seek a waiver, in that instance, I don't think we need to say we have identified certain folks to negotiate with, but just the fact that we went through the process and either we didn't get a high enough bid or we didn't get enough bidders, that's evidence enough for the CDE to say, okay, now you go off on your own and attempt to find your own purchasers.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
And there was one
Sure.
question that we had asked last time too. I guess that this dovetails off of that. If we find someone who we want to sell to, and then the board comes back and says, well, we're putting these stipulations on the property that we don't want to sell to a charter school. We don't want to sell to another entity that's going to be competing with us for our students, or, I mean, is that something that's allowed for them to place those stipulations on the sale of the property?
So outright, like explicitly, no, but we have in other situations, kind of like, Kelly, how you go through a pre-qualification process. We have put in place a pre-qualification process, and they have to go through this stringent, submitting their documents, what their purpose is, what their intent and program may be, before they qualify to submit a bid. But that's the difficulty, because you're right, a lot of school districts do not.
Oops, you froze. Karina, you froze. Hopefully she'll
Kelly, you can keep going until she figures it out.
okay. So with this presentation, I'm hoping that Karina was able to answer the bulk of the questions that we had, and hopefully provide us a much clearer picture of kind of the parameters that we need to move forward in. And so with that, do you guys have any additional questions or comments about what we just talked about? Sharon, and then Felix. And then Jeff. You're on mute, Sharon.
Okay. The only question that I have, or just delving into, the board has consciously decided that this property is not fit for students to be on, okay? And therefore, we're going to look at surplusing possibly this piece of property. Having said that, a school, I mean, can they say, no, we don't want another school, we don't want a private school, we don't want a childcare center, we don't want, because for moral purposes or whatever, to sell to, get money, and then say, oh yeah, it's okay, now you can put kids on it. Is that going to be something that the board is going to have to wrap their head around?
I would think so. Marcus, you want to answer that?
Well, I think that's what Karina was kind of alluding to. They can't expressly disallow that, but there are ways that they can set up some criteria to try to I guess get the type of bidder that they would be comfortable with selling to. So, and you know, and that's all legal stuff. I mean, I don't know how it works, but I understand what you're saying, though, definitely.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. And I think childcare centers were on that list of agencies that, you know, fell in a pecking order of some kind if they
get priority. Right.
Yeah, in the priority. So I just, out of curiosity, I don't know where they'll go, but based on their rationale for doing this to begin with, leads me to believe that that will be an issue for them.
Sure. Felix?
Yeah, I just wanted to, Kelly, I wanted to clarify in your last question to Karina where she was cut off, and also in the question or the point that Sharon just raised or discussed with Mr. Battle, there is a legal maneuver that is customarily deployed in a situation when you want to exclude certain occupancies, and I'm sure you're aware of the deed restriction. This is something that's often used, for example, by grocery stores that'll acquire larger sites, build a grocery store, and then sell off other sites. For example, Target will only buy sites, they don't rent, and then what happens is that a grocery store might put a deed restriction on the rest of the property that prevents anybody else from opening a grocery store on these other parcels. I don't know if that option is open to the school district because it would diminish voluntarily or potentially diminish the value of the property by excluding certain uses, but it's very often done, it's very often seen, and it seems to me that unless there's a state law to the contrary, you should be allowed to exclude school or childcare uses if you wanted to do so.
That's a very good question. Karina, are you back without video? She must still be frozen. You know what? We can go ahead and have her answer that question later and do some more research on that. So I'm not even going to attempt to try and answer or provide any kind of information on that because that's out of my area of expertise. Next person was Noli or Jeff?
It was me.
Okay.
So maybe it's more of a request, and I apologize, Kelly, if this adds work. But it sounds like we're looking at our three properties.
Mm-hmm.
Marshall, the horse property, and Patterson Ranch. Is there any way that a synopsis can be put together on each property and kind of the history and where we stand and where the direction we're going, or what's being planned for each of those so I can see it to kind of help?
Oh, sure. That's not a problem at all. We actually have quite a bit of documentation, so it's just a matter of us putting it together in a format that you guys can digest.
I think that would be helpful because I think I live in the world of rumors as well, which I hate to live in. But, you know, I've heard years of conversations about the horse property becoming a new Thornton with an elementary school built on it. which then if that were to truly happen, then that would change our plans for Thornton. But now the middle school conversions going forward, I can't imagine that we would abandon that. And I've heard in the rumor mill too for Patterson Ranch that the property that was donated to us is swampland and that we couldn't build a school on it. So I think to have real information that you guys have in a synopsis form would help as we go through these discussions.
Okay, that's not a problem. Liz?
Yeah, and to tail on Jeff's comments, I do know that when Dr. Morris was still with us, there were discussions between the city and the district about how that property was going to be divvied between the two of the agencies, in part because there is a water main that runs in the backside or corner of the street facing property, I believe it is, because, you know, Alameda Creek is behind, and there's some function of the water district in that area. And I don't know if there was any resolution to that discussion. In fact, I think they were delaying taking ownership of any property until that could be resolved as to what portion in it, in what kind of a layout would the district and the city properties be keystoned together. So, so hopefully that will come to light in your summary and assessment.
Okay. Therese, can I ask, do you have any memory of that particular property and how we acquired it and what the initial plans were?
You're talking about the Patterson Ranch property now?
Yes, ma'am.
That was to be, and Sharon can perhaps provide some info too. That was to be a donation to the district. And there was question about exactly which parcel would be donated because we had the CDE rep come and assess the site. So he found that there were certain concerns he had as far as traffic and so on, as far as the placement of the school. So I don't know that there's ever been a resolution of what the final proposal would be for using that, because we came up with several different layouts. So where the board is with what the proposed layouts were, I don't know.
Okay.
And the traffic was a huge issue, as well as the water. The way the kids would have to travel to get to school, people did not feel it was a safe route. That was one problem. And then I don't remember the term, but there's a term for the land there, because it was farmland and there's a lot of water underneath there.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Liz.
So we've talked a little bit about the Naylor Act and how that's used in terms of the passing of property between a school district and the city, for instance. Now, what about land trades? If Patterson was determined not to be suitable for a school site, but the Marshall site, which is half school district, half city, if the city were to give us their portion, which is the parkland, and then they get the whole Patterson Ranch parcel, would that be a land trade that could be negotiated through the Naylor Act?
That's a good question, and we can have Karina research that and provide us some information the next time we get together. That's a very good question, and one that I asked a similar question a few months ago in terms of, you know, what are our rights for trading and how does that actually work? And so there's a lot of different things that we can do, but for this particular situation, I definitely would rely on Karina and her team to provide us, exact rulings and things like that, so that we wouldn't make an assumption and be wrong.
Kelly?
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me? So I was gonna just say two things about Patterson and then the property exchange. So when the issue with the pipelines came up at Marshall, we embarked on a district-wide pipeline investigation. There is a Hetch-Hetchy line that runs across Patterson. That's what you're all referencing. And it turned out to be that it's an inactive Hetch-Hetchy line. And there is a facility layout that the board has determined to best, I guess, place the parking lot and such so that we avoid anything happening out there. The problem is, Kelly, I think we have to talk about what things, information we can release to this committee, because a lot of the pipeline information is privileged right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then with respect to the property exchange, the high pressure gas line actually is kind of starts over in the city side. So I'm not sure that even if we swapped, we would end up with like the entirety of the gas line. And so I'm not sure that would be a good outcome for the district if we're trying to avoid that pipeline.
Okay.
The only thing I was going to add, Karina,
Mm-hmm.
the only thing I was going to add, Karina, is that, we're not limited. I mean, if we were interested in exchanging, I mean, we're not limited to just negotiating with the city. I mean, we can negotiate with any developer if they have parcel or land that we were really interested in, and they were really interested in what
Mm-hmm.
so.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. So with the property exchange statutes, that has no restrictions or statutory process. And that's actually how we were going to adjust our boundary lines at the Patterson site, kind of property exchanging bits and pieces amongst the parties, so that we didn't have to go through the whole surplus process. So if there are entities or developers that have land that the district wants to swap with, then it's a quick process. And that's actually how we acquired or reacquired the Timothy Ricks site. That was through a property exchange.
Okay. So I know that we've run short on time, and I was going to ask you all, do you mind extending our meeting about another 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to give Mr. Battle an opportunity to talk about the document that he shared with us on the ability for us to use the funds of the surplus property to supplement the general fund. So Marcus, I wanted to give you just a few minutes to talk about that.
So, and I'm not sure how much history we discussed last time, and in terms of why we're here, how did we get here? And just to give everybody some history, several things that's going on right now in the district. First is our enrollment. We are now in the third year of an enrollment decline. As of last week, we've lost about 1,000 students over the past 3 years. So we're definitely in a declining enrollment trend right now. The other thing that factor has definitely put a lot of pressure on the district's budget. We are having some fiscal issues right now that we are trying to take some actions on. What the governor and the legislature have done under SB 98, and this is a similar legislation that they had back during the recession of 2008, 2009, which allowed school districts flexibility to be able to sell surplus property and be able to take a percentage of those funds and put them in their general fund to help support their general fund. So they've recently reinstated the statute on the SB 98, And they've also added some additional amendments to that SB 820. So as a district, there's a window of opportunity that we have right now. We have to take advantage of this flexibility legislation. So what I sent was was included in the packet that Kelly provided was some information that we just received from our statewide advocacy organization, which provides for some of the certifications that the district would have to make once we have determined that a property is surplus, and let's say the board decides that they want to sell it, then these certifications must be made. And I think Liz had alluded to, how the property was purchased, because that is one of the factors in the certification that we have to respond to. So we have to do that work anyway. We have to determine how these properties were purchased and whether it was purchased with state funds or if it was purchased with bond funds or how it was purchased. We also, some of those other provisions that it doesn't violate provisions of the Local Bond Act, it's purchased with non-state funds. The board would have to certify that the property is not suitable to meet school construction needs for the next 10 years. The property, that the proceeds will be used for as part of one-time general fund purposes. So those certifications that have to be made. That's the information that we have presented there. And if you all have any questions about any of that, you can bring that to the next meeting or let Kelly know. I know we're running out of time. I could probably answer a few questions right now, but so I just wanted to let you guys know how we got here. I don't believe that we are, based on the most recent demographic study, which Kelly also, if she needs to bring in demographic enrollment to talk about some of that, or if Kelly would agendize that, just so, because you all have to make a determination that these properties won't be needed for a school purpose. And I would contend that that based on our current decline and based on the enrollment projections that the most recent enrollment projections that were done this past spring, that right now that does not seem foreseeable. Our enrollment is going to go down to 33,000 by 2028. So we're definitely in an enrollment decline trend, which I would say is finally caught up with Fremont. Fremont had not been impacted by that countywide. We're probably one of the last 2 or 3 school districts that are beginning to see that actual decline now. So I'll stop right there in case there's any questions or.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Yes, Liz and Felix.
Okay, so as I mentioned at our last meeting, we have this downtown agreement with the city for the Williamson site for use as an elementary school. And in that land conveyance agreement, we're supposed to make progress towards that end. We may be a little bit behind schedule, obviously, the powers that be, even in applying for review from the state and things of that matter can delay things. However, I know only just recently the board approved a $3 million installment payment, I believe, to the city for that land.
Mhm.
And that coming out of maybe developer funds, I think. The state match doesn't appear to be coming in very quickly, if at all. And that came up in an FAC meeting recently. And I believe Kelly was going to look into, what money we have received from the state and maybe an
We should
estimation
have that update
expect.
probably within the next 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. So, our current bond wasn't intended. I mean, yes, it has been used to pay for additional classrooms, but that wasn't supposed to be the main focus of the bond. And so opening up an elementary school just wasn't part of the plan. So I'm assuming we're going to need to use any monies coming from the state into our capital fund, or developer fees, you know, those various funds that come in, sale of site fees, for instance. So, you know, again, this is a conversation that needs to be had once we have all the cards on the table. But I think we're going to need to start seeing some numbers, you know, of potential shortfalls, for instance, in the budget that could be helped by a sale of site, and or the monies that are coming in that could help support building this school obligation.
And then Felix had a question.
Mr. Battle, just a quick question. How long is this window of opportunity of the recession era legislation that's been revived, where a portion of the purchase proceeds could be repurposed for the general fund?
Yeah, based on the legislation, I believe it's June 30th, 2024. So by that time, we would have to have surplus whatever property we're going to surplus. It would have had to gone through the process that Karina had described, and we would have to sell it by that time.
Okay. Yes, Kathy.
Just a quick thing, and it's kind of in reference to what Liz said. I don't think bond funds were used to purchase or were contributed to the purchase of property. I'm on the bond oversight committee, and I've never seen anything on our spreadsheets that show that Measure E was used for that purpose, the downtown purpose. And so I may have missed something, or there may be a misunderstanding, but I just wanted to throw that out.
No, you're absolutely right. There's not been any purchase of land or property with Measure E funds. As
Yeah,
far
I mean,
as
and
we know.
that and Measure I are the only two current bonds that are out there, and Measure I is something totally different. So just thank you for reassuring me.
Are there any other questions for our wonderful guests? No? Okay. Well, thank you guys. So just to recap, our next meeting will be based on the schedule that we set for ourselves last meeting. Our next meeting will be October 29th at 4 o'clock. And I will send out another Zoom invitation. And just to recap, I am going to work with Karina to gather a synopsis on all of the properties that we're going to evaluate, which would include the Horse property, Patterson Ranch, and Marshall. I have documented, and we're going to pull information on the, which one was it that you had referenced? Sorry about that. My notes are jumbled now. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. On how did we acquire Marshall, to investigate whether we used state funds or non-state funds based on the code 17463.7. I have a list of questions that we will document and answer. We will like to have information on the pre-qualification process for the submission of bids, and then also get information on what exactly is required for a waiver. And if we are to go about getting one, is there a fee associated with it? And if so, what does that look like? And then also, what is our penalty for all of our properties moving forward if we, of course, cannot meet the deadlines that have been established? What does that really look like? And create scenarios, because and then I think we probably have to do a appraisal of some kind once we kind of make a decision as to which direction we're going to go in, to really know what the real value of the property is. And then, oh, and then Felix asked about deed restrictions. So we'll get information on what our availability is to do a deed restriction on this particular, or on any of our parcels, actually. And let's see. And then Sharon asked the question about, I just put in parentheses, moral purposes. Where can we find, I guess, standing on the decision of what the board has made based on any moral obligation or ethical interpretation of what the use of the site is?
Kelly, just for my clarity, when you say deed restriction, are you talking about how the properties are zoned, or are you talking about something totally different?
Well, Felix, go ahead and answer that, because I was just interpreting based on what he'd said. So go ahead, Felix.
So a deed restriction is a common instrument, Mr. Battle, by which an owner can restrict the future use of the site, and it usually cannot be done except by court action. So these are very long-running restrictions, often found in retail centers, but also sometimes when things are in motion and you don't want things to turn into things that you don't like or that don't work with your business. I mean, I've not seen government do this so much because I'm not sure government.
So Felix, you're asking whether we should do a search of the records to determine if there is a deed restriction.
No, I think the question for your legal group, Mr. Battle, would be whether the school district is allowed to record a single, it's usually very brief, a brief document in the with the clerk, the county clerk, that says that the property may not be used for a particular purpose.
Okay.
That usually reduces the marketability, because obviously you can't sell it to a party that might be interested in using it as such. But it would probably accomplish some of the goals that have been mentioned here.
Okay, I understand. But I do think, Kelly, also it would be, Karina, I was going to say, I do think it would be helpful also to know how each one of these properties are zoned, because if they are, I mean, I think that'll help all of us, because if they are all already zoned for, let's say, housing, then that kind of, because if they're not, then that's, there may have to be some conversations with the City of Planning Commission if that's it survives before we sell it, because as was said by Felix, we would be in a better position to get the optimal buyer for that. So, Karina, what was you going to say?
And then Liz. Go ahead, Karina.
Kelly, I wasn't going to say, I think, Kelly, you were asking me if I had an answer to the deed restriction.
No, I was just saying that we would do some research on it.
Yes, and then Marcus, I do have the zoning information for all three, I believe, so I can have that ready for the next meeting.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's great.
Liz?
Well, and I'm assuming because these are currently publicly held that they're currently zoned as public buildings, but the surrounding areas, evidently are communities, maybe of certain densities, but the city has had a revision of its general plan. So where there were once, single home districts, they're now rezoned for multi-unit homes. And so I guess knowing where the general plan overlays our schools, and if there's been any changes since those schools were put into place, I think it's a good thing to know.
Okay. All right. Well, all of these things I'm noting, and I'm going to put on our list of things to research. Is there anything we haven't covered that you all would like to have discussed at our next meeting? Yes, Kathy.
Not discussed, but included in what you're sending out. Since you've added 2 more properties, it would be really nice if there's a simplified map of Fremont that shows where everything is located in relation to existing schools, okay? And I'm sure there's one that's available somewhere. Might even be on the website, but that would be useful. I'm sitting there trying to think the horse property. Where did I think that was? Thank you.
I will definitely have that included. And Karina, you were about to say something? Oh, I'm sorry, Felix, you had a question. Felix, go ahead.
One last question for me, Kelly. Are we expected to review any kind of demographic data? Because I'm unfamiliar. I was at the meeting when the demographers delivered the mea culpa to the board by accident. But other than that, I have no, I mean, I know that it's going down, but are we supposed to render an opinion as to what the needs are for the school district on a demographic basis? Is that supposed to be part of our decision? Would it be helpful to have that information or no?
I think it would be helpful to have, but I think you all are only using it as a tool to guide you in your decision with the displacement of the properties that we're actually reviewing, and to create a position or an opinion to say that, yes, we absolutely need to surplus these properties and this is why, or we need to keep this property because X, Y, and Z. So Marcus, did you have any other to add to that?
No, I think your answer was pretty close to what I would say.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you all so much again for taking the time out of your afternoon and on a Thursday. Once again, I extend the same appreciation that Mr. Battle extended to you all. Thank you all for participating in such a wonderful and important exercise for our district. And I look forward to getting together with you guys in another 2 weeks. And hopefully we can keep moving along as quickly as we are right now and get some good stuff done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Please stay healthy.